And we're pleased to be joined from his home in Antigonish, a volunteer with the Diocesan Council for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Antigonish, here to share some thoughts about his experiences with the Canadian Catholic Organization for Development and Peace and some updates about what the organization has been doing in recent times. We're pleased to welcome to Telile 24/7, Terry O'Toole. Thank you for joining us on the show today, Terry.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Adam.
We're very pleased to have you here, and we're bringing you on because things have shifted, of course, for the Canadian Catholic Organization for Development and Peace in terms of how it's conducting its activities, including its fundraising activities through COVID-19. And I want to get to that shortly, but I'd like to begin by painting a picture of the organization and what it does, just in case there are some folks in our viewing audience that may still need a bit of a refresher course. You have been involved personally with development and peace for many years, including at the national level in Ottawa. Can you tell us a bit about what exactly the organization is, how it fits in with the Catholic Church locally, and what it does?
Well, it came out of the Vatican Council, Second Vatican Council, which ran from 1962 to 1965. And one of the documents that really gave it a push was the one called The Church in the Modern World. And the council really put a challenge to both the bishops and the laity. We have to look at the signs of the times here. What's happening in our time? When the council finished, there was a lot of the bishops from the developed world, the richer countries, went home feeling, fairly satisfied with things. But the bishops from Africa, Asia, and Latin America were saying, you're going home to fairly well cared for population, that has food and housing and clothing and the amenities of life. But our peoples are struggling like heck. The poverty gap between the wealthy nations and the poor nations is only increasing. So we have to develop a different structure, a different relationship. Poverty is not an accident, it is planned. It happens when wealthy countries take the natural resources of poorer countries for our own benefit, for our own wealth. So in 1967, which is the first year the development and peace started, Pope Paul VI came out with Pro Populorum Progressio, and he said that this has to be the basis for a new relationship. So from that Populorum Progressio, development and peace came along, and it asked Canadians to understand the reasons why poverty is existing, and that we have to have a new relationship. So one of the things that it did was it tried to set up a diocesan committee in every parish across the country. Mm-hmm. And in the midst or in the context of those committees, we would study the causes of poverty. And in the late 60s and into the 70s, we were into a lot of conflict in the world at that time. There was the Vietnam War. There was repression going on in Eastern Europe, in El Salvador. The Cold War was ramping up. Militarization was going on. And then we were told we have to pay attention. We can't be the ones who take the solution to the poorer countries. We have to let those poorer countries tell us what has to be done. So that was a change in philosophy from that old charity to the recipient idea, that we send money and hope things that get better. One of the big forces that was affecting development peace was called theology of liberation. And theology of liberation was going back to the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt, that people in captivity have to find a new way to live. And so that's what was happening with development peace, that we pay attention to what's going on there. So we became very, very involved Actually the mantra for the church at that time was a preferential option for the poor, that we had to be looking at the needs that they had. And so in the 80s, we were seeing globalization was ramping up, and globalization saw a lot of manufacturing and so on moving from Canada and the US to Mexico and to other countries where there was cheap labor, no environmental regulations, no respect for human rights, in order to maximize a profit. At the same time as that was happening, there were debt crises going on. These countries had borrowed money from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and paying back the debt to these organizations was depriving the people of the basic services that they needed. You know, so we had a huge campaign in the mid 90s. The sub-Saharan countries, for example, were paying 4 times back to, they spent $10 billion in paying off a debt, 4 times what they would have spent on healthcare and education. So as that kind of stuff was leaving the countries, people were doing without the basics of schools, clinics, education, and so on.
Do you think it ever catches people by surprise when the social justice face of the Roman Catholic Church is given a higher spotlight in movements like the Canadian Catholic Organization for Development and Peace? Did you ever have moments either in the past or even in the present where folks that are either inside or outside the Catholic Church might be surprised to see that it's not simply a matter of raising funds for individual parishes, but there is such a focus on injustices nationally and internationally?
Oh, you're right on the money with that one, because it was a matter of when you talk about justice, you're talking about redistributing wealth around the world so that everybody has what they need to stay alive. There are very, very powerful interests who don't want that to happen. And one of the big examples is the mining industry in Canada. 75% of the mining companies in the world are headquartered here in Canada. And they're going to places like Guatemala. We've had Hudbay Minerals and Goldcorp and different mining companies. This is an example of what I mean by control over these poorer countries. They go into an area and they start mining gold. And in order to do that in the way that is the most efficient for them, they have to control the local population. They have to get them out of the way. And they do that by a number of ways. And one of them is they bulldoze down whatever forests are in that area. And then they start the mining process. And the mining process for gold is very, very toxic. There's arsenic and there's mercury and chemicals like that that get into the environment. And oftentimes they use either the local army or police or their own little militias to get rid of the people who they feel are the biggest opponents. They could be community leaders, catechists, union leaders, and they have committed all sorts of crimes against the people in doing this. And one of the big projects that Development Peace has had is trying to get the Canadian government to establish an ombudsman for mining justice. An ombudsman that not just goes to the mining companies and say, you're doing a naughty thing here, you've got to stop, but to give that ombudsman the power, the legal power that they need to take actually those companies to court for reparations for the people as to what's happened down there. Now, the mining industry is a very powerful lobby. And it has been able to get the Canadian government, not just the latest government, but the government before that, the lobbying has made them back off and have really only left the ombudsman in the consultative state, an advisory state, and with absolutely no power, to legislate fines and reparations for those people.
Does that message from Development and Peace about safety in mining, not just here in Canada, but around the world, Does it play in communities in the Diocese of Antigonish that have a strong mining history? I think about the Glace Bay, New Waterford areas, Inverness, Pictou County. I don't know if you can answer this question yourself, but what has been the reception to that message and to that campaign in these areas?
That's an excellent question. I'm really not sure, but I know that the history of the mining communities, particularly in Cape Breton, have been one of tremendous struggle for the people to get decent wages, safe working conditions, and we've seen the results of what happens in mining industries when there is not, the safety of the workers is not paramount in there. We saw that with Westray. How many mining explosions and collapses have happened over the years because the owners refused to do what was necessary to make sure that the miners had safety. So when you bring up this mining question for communities in other parts of the world, people in Glace Bay, New Waterford, Dominion, Inverness, Pictou County, they have no trouble understanding what those people are up against because they've had firsthand experience of that kind of misuse of power.
I wanted to ask you about the work that's been done to keep the profile of development and peace and its various campaigns going over the last 20 years. And I remember Natalie McMaster, a renowned fiddler from this neck of the woods, being introduced as a development and peace ambassador 20 years ago. And, similar folks have come on board to support the program, but has it been more difficult to keep the profile of development and peace up in more recent times? Is that making your job and the jobs of your fellow committee members harder?
Yeah, we depend, Adam, very much on the support of pastors and bishops, to encourage parishioners to take on development and peace. It's too bad it has to be that way because when you look at the Gospels, you look at Matthew 25, Christ is only asking for one thing: justice and compassion. And to keep that message in front of the people has been a real challenge from day one. Development Peace is reorganizing itself now, and it's bringing 4 bishops onto its national council starting this fall. What we hope is that the bishops who come onto that council really have a good understanding of what our partners do in the third world, what they do for their people, whether it's the landless peasants in Brazil who are fighting against evictions down there, or it's understanding the history of what went on, particularly like in El Salvador, with the civil war that was there during the 80s. And Natalie actually went on one of those solidarity tours, to El Salvador with Shirley Hardery from Port Hawkesbury. And it's that kind of exposure that people have to have. Now, not everybody can go, but Development Peace uses a couple of things. One of them is a solidarity visitor. We'll have a partner come, and talk to people about what's going on the ground. We'll also have videos, particularly during the Share Lent campaign and the fall action. They're just short, brief videos showing what's happening. A good example of a very vibrant education and a very important response right now is what's going on in Brazil. The government of Brazil is a very far-right government. It wants to burn down the Amazon, which is such an important ecological force for the health of the planet in terms of oxygen and water. It has about 25% of the world's fresh water. The wealthy landowners or the wealthy ranchers want to get in there, clear the trees so they can set up these big cattle ranches. Illegal logging is also going on. They're taking out aromatic hardwoods. They also want the area for hydroelectric. They're also drilling for petroleum. The indigenous peoples of the Amazon, their lives are terribly threatened by this. Their whole spirituality depends on that rainforest. That their religious and cultural and historical practices are intimately tied to the Amazon. And so this has been a recent campaign of development and peace. We've sent all sorts of requests and petitions, both to government and to the people, directly to the people, encouraging them in their defense of the Amazon. That's been a huge one lately, really big. And that's all tied in to Pope Francis's Laudato Si, which came out in 2015 on care for our common home. And I know it's a little off topic, or not topic, but our focus here, but I'm a registered nurse. And I am very, very proud of our Confederation of Nurses Union, which has produced a document, Climate Change and Its Effects on Health, which I've been spreading around our local. So it's also part of this teaching, this work that has to be done. Development and peace with Laudato Si, with the nurses doing this kind of thing. The whole health of the planet is tied into this. It's huge. And that combination of climate change and COVID has created a mega public health challenge for the planet. So we need everybody in on this. There's nobody who's not an expert on this because it's affecting our lives directly.
I am glad that you brought that up for the reason that, speaking of Brazil, of course, Brazil just behind the US in terms of the number of COVID-19 cases being reported. And I wanted to ask you, and you may have a perspective on this as a registered nurse as well, working with other registered nurses. Did the onset of the pandemic make it harder for development and peace and for its sister organizations around the world to be able to carry out its efforts and its campaigns, to be able to provide basic humanitarian services, or not so basic as it were, when people are being urged to either go into lockdown or stay 6 feet apart? Basically, did the pandemic make development and peace's job that much harder over the past year?
Oh, it did. It very much, because what development and peace really relies on is people coming together to discuss what's going on and to learn the dynamic of poverty and how we solve it. That's probably one of the bigger things. The fact that uh, churches were closed for a while, also kept the message from getting through as well. Churches reopened again, but they opened up to a very small number of people for every liturgy that was going on. So that's why we're having this coming weekend really the replacement for the Share Lent collection, because we were not able to carry it out, in I think it was April, end of March or early April. We were not able, because that was at the height of the COVID, infection at that time. So yes, so it's had a huge effect that way. We had Brazil there. The president of Brazil does not care about COVID and has no plans to do anything about it. In fact, he's, in a very insidious way, is because so many poor people live in such crowded conditions, and there's so much opposition to him because he's not paying a lot of attention to them. He's more concerned about the wealthy getting even wealthier in his country. He's kind of hoping that COVID cleans out some of these people, like this a very nasty approach. But he's not at all concerned about the people in that country, and that makes it difficult for the people there to assemble as well.
Obviously, one of the reasons we did want to speak to you today is about the delay of fundraising and major exposure for development and peace to the coming weekend. And the Share Lent campaign obviously didn't happen because Lent celebrations didn't happen. Churches were shut down across the diocese and around the country in terms of the Catholic celebrations of Lent and Easter. So what kind of hit did that result in for development and peace, not just in the Diocese of Antigonish, but around the country, leading to the campaign that's coming up in just a few days' time?
Yes, it did. And that was the thing. With COVID hit the country nationally, so it hit DNP nationally. So the various diocesan collections were way down, because of that, because of not being able to, assemble. So what we've had to depend on, like, we've had some very supportive pastors We've used the Mass for Shut-ins as a way to get the message across of what was coming this weekend. Father Bill Burke did a fantastic job in Sydney in putting this on. Our Bishop Bishop Kirkpatrick has sent out a letter to all the parishes, talking about development peace, its background, its importance to the Catholic Church, its gospel message, to all our partners. It's also a way of the diocese connecting with Pope Francis and what he wants. He's always talking on behalf of the poor. So this is a complement to his message, and we, benefit from his as well. So our new bishop has done a really fine job of keeping this in front of the people.
Mm-hmm. The Apostle Paul in the New Testament famously said, "Run the race to win." And it's with that I start to wind down this interview, Terry, by asking, is there reason for optimism for yourself and for your fellow members of the Canadian Catholic Organization of Development and Peace in the next few months? I mean, we are still dealing with COVID-19. We are arguably at the start of the second wave, some parts of Canada and the world firmly entrenched in their second wave. But do you feel that there is hope for your organization to be able to pick up and to be able to continue to push forward to carry out the campaigns for social justice around the world in the next couple of years' time?
I can only hope. I think this weekend's collection will be a good barometer of how well Development and Peace's mission has been communicated, to Catholics across the country. Once people find out about what it does, they find it easier. They can connect with it. For years, people didn't realize that Share Lent and D&P were the same thing. Thought they were different things. So this weekend will be a good test of that. People have to also know its history. And it's been involved in some very, very important things. It was involved intimately in apartheid. In fact, Nelson Mandela asked Gabrielle Lachance, who was the executive director at that time, to be part of his Nelson Mandela Fund, on the board for that. Rigoberta Menchú, who won a Nobel Peace Prize from Guatemala, asked one of the development and peace animateurs to accompany her to Oslo for the presentation of that Nobel Prize. So, and it was very, very important in when the dirty war in Argentina was going on. The grandmothers of the Plaza de Mayo, whose children had been imprisoned, and a good number of those children, their daughters were pregnant when they went to prison. The children born of those women were then farmed out to the military. And those grandmothers have been looking for them ever since. So Development and Peace had a project where, this is our fall action campaign, they had a calendar and they had 31 names on it. And you took your birthday. It didn't matter what, it wasn't the month of your birthday, it was the day. So mine being on the 5th of the month, I picked number 5 on that list, who was a particular grandmother. I sent her a letter. Tens of thousands of letters went into Argentina and embarrassed the government into starting to respond to these grandmothers. We did the same thing with apartheid. All the political prisoners who were part of the African National Congress, who were peaceful animators of a new deal in South Africa against apartheid, they had their names. 30 of those names were down. We wrote letters to all of those prisoners. As bad as a government is, as tyrannical as a government might be, they all want to look good. So an international letter campaign that tells them they don't look good is embarrassing. So that's some of the political action that they've been doing. People who are struggling in places like Brazil and in Central America have to know that the rest of the international community knows what their struggle is. And that's DNP's big job, is to keep those struggles in front of us. We've also taken on in 2015 with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in terms of indigenous communities in Canada. DNP wants to walk with those people in the same way.
Did you want to add anything else about all of this just before we wrap up here?
It takes people, and it takes persistence. It takes potlucks, getting together in a safe way and sharing a meal and talking about what to do with development and peace. It takes the animators. It takes national participation. It takes youth. We've had youth since the early 2000s coming onto the National Council. It takes solidarity tours, and it takes a heck of a lot of prayer.
That seems to really concentrate the message of development peace. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, listen, thank you very much, Terry, for giving us some time here. We certainly feel like we've learned a lot in the last little while, and we look forward to being able to catch up with you folks again to see how your programs are doing in 2020 and 2021 and beyond. Thank you for giving me some time on Telile 24/7 today.
Well, thanks for inviting me into the Telile community. Very much. Appreciate it.
Terry O'Toole is a volunteer with the Diocesan Council of the Diocese of Antigonish and a longtime volunteer and participant in the Diocese's Development and Peace Organization.